Hi everyone, welcome to Talks at Google. Today we have Amanda Bradford, the founder and CEO of dating app The League. The League is a dating app that combines data and social graphs from both Facebook and LinkedIn to offer privacy from coworkers, more context about a potential match, and a curated community of ambitious singles who desire an equally driven partner. Amanda previously worked in technical roles at both Salesforce and Google and holds an MBA from Stanford University and a BS in Information Systems from Carnegie Mellon. It's a great pleasure for us to have Amanda here with us today.
Thanks, guys.
So to get started, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for The League, because it definitely has a unique spin on the dating app.
Yeah, I took a lot of, I drew from my own experiences, I like to say. So I kind of followed your classic design a product that you want to use and don't really listen to other people, and then kind of figure it out once you launch it. So I was at Stanford Business School, which is obviously a very selective community. It's a pretty intense admissions process. I think I planned for about 2 years on like how I was going to get into Stanford and all the things I needed to do. And so you could argue like, the longer prep time you have to, the better your application is for business school. And so I think part of what inspired me around this kind of taking that model and overlaying it onto the dating communities is how effective it was in matching people. I think Peter can talk to this to our class. I think we had like 20 or 30 couples that just like formed in the first month. And you're kind of like, what is it about this community that kind of creates a way that people can kind of feel connected faster? And I think it is because people did put their best effort into their profile. They worked really hard. They made sure their photos were good. They put their application in and they waited. And then when they join the community, they're there for the right reasons and they have the right they're going to their class and they're taking notes, and it's sort of like they're good students, right? Because you put all this time into it. And so I think that's sort of the concept I want to take into dating, because I think dating suffers from people like having a lack of a kind of intent or motivation to have like a really core kind of relationship seeking experience, right? There's a lot of these casual apps, and so I wanted to kind of take what I learned at business school and how Stanford did such a good job of kind of creating this diverse but very interconnected community, and how could I kind of scale that into the digital? How could I create like a digital version of business school? And so I think that was sort of the like kind of high level vision, and then of course it gets down into the nuts and bolts of execution, right? Which is you can't always execute things the right way, the perfect way on V1. So I think we're kind of working towards that. But yeah, so that was, I guess, the impetus of, me. I was single, I was in business school, and I was like, I want this app because I want to save myself time and bad dates and terrible conversations. So I was optimizing kind of for myself, I guess, selfishly. And then I found myself writing support feature requests into like Hinge and Coffee Meets Bagel and Tinder, and I was literally writing them like what I thought they should do. And then I remember I Googled all the founders, and I was like looking at their background, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm more technical than all of these guys. And I worked at a tech company. These guys like had come from finance and stuff. I was like, why am I writing them feature requests? Like I was like writing specs for them, and I was like, I'm just gonna go and build this myself. So I kind of talked myself into like going and starting this project instead of kind of complaining about how much dating apps suck all the time, which I was.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what would you say is the one differentiating feature from The League that sets it apart from other dating apps out there? What would you say to someone who's maybe using Tinder or Bumble?
I mean, I always say like I always think our three core like pillars or value proposition is, one, we just give you much more context about a user. So we have your LinkedIn, we're pulling your LinkedIn data and your Facebook data and your kind of League data that you give us, so you just know more information about the person, like step one. And then step two, because we pull that social graph from work and your social life, so your Facebook friends, we actually block you from those like what I think are awkward and unnecessary interactions to be like matched with your colleague on a dating app when you're working on a project with them. That's just like, I think, unnecessary thing, and we don't need to do that anymore because we have the social graphs at our disposal. So I think setting up that privacy so people feel like it's a very safe place that they can be single and they don't have to worry about kind of bleeding into work. And then the last piece is that community aspect. I think having a community where people are, whether or not they are self-selecting into a community that is for an egalitarian relationship, they are kind of stating somewhat that they're open to like a pretty, a power couple relationship or a relationship where both parties are equal. And so I think creating a community where that is the ethos and the values, and maybe not everyone upholds them all the time, but if that's kind of part of the table stakes to even get in. So I think that that's sort of how you create a really good value system and community, like a Google. You know, Google has a great internal community, so I always kind of think is like, I want to create where like all the people that use the league feels like a bunch of Googlers, right? And they're all debating around how we should kind of you know, dictate the community or what rules we should put in place and what governance, and I want the community to be involved in those decisions. I don't want to be like a big brother where we're like, here's what you need to do and you get kicked out if you do this. I want it to be kind of a democracy. So we're kind of focusing on like, how do we build the social aspect of the community so that our users can help us with some of these harder decisions about when do we kick someone out, or when do we is that profile, you know, is that league worthy, and what are we calling league worthy? And as we kind of talk about a lot of these existential questions, you know, we want our users to kind of feel involved as if it's their, you know, their community that they're getting to have a voice in.
Is the definition of what you consider to be league worthy, has that changed over time?
Yeah, I like that word. We came up with that word because I think it's like purposefully ambiguous. But I think, you know, I think what we've seen is, yeah, it definitely has changed, definitely by region. So, you know, you go from New York where almost half your users are in finance or tech or media, basically, and then you go to somewhere like we just launched Houston. Oil and gas is like the #1 industry there. So really understanding, like we had a whole table of kind of classifications on programs, schools, and like different jobs. Like for instance, Comcast in Philadelphia is like, you know, the Google there. Like that's a very, you know, so we had to kind of re-rank and recalibrate a lot of how we thought about sort of, you know, selection and what we were using as our proxy. Because if you think about it, we're just using a bunch of, we're copying the Google playbook, which is use GPA as a proxy for intelligence and don't let people, you know, I remember when I first started at Google, like half my friends were like, I don't have a 3.75 GPA, so I can't apply. And, you know, the Google's line was always like, we know that GPA is a stupid indicator, but it's a proxy and it's not a bad one. And I remember when we did the case study on that, I was like, I think that's what we do. That's what we do with kind of education and profession. It's like, we know it's not perfect. There's definitely a lot of other things and factors to evaluate, but it's a proxy and it does a pretty good like 80% of the job. And then I think that's where the kind of fun, exciting part is, where you get the humans involved and we can kind of build a perfect solution kind of next to it.
What are some of the factors that you take into account for determining whether someone should get approved or not, besides GPA?
We don't ask GPA, but we have their LinkedIn profile, so you can see, you know, what institutions they've attended, and you can see what jobs they've held, what titles they've had, the progression of, you know, their titles. You can kind of see, you get a decent indication of if someone is relatively ambitious from their LinkedIn profile. So I think that's sort of one thing we look for, is just sort of that, you know, I kind of think of the league, it is a little bit of a workaholic community. Like everyone in it is, you know, they're working, work is one of their passions, and that is a shared value that is shared across the community. So I think, you asked, I think one of your questions was about like, you know, screening based on values, but I actually would argue that like the people who join the league value education, they also value ambition, and they value people going after and accomplishing things. And so I think, to me, like we've kind of created one of the few value-based dating communities, rather than kind of the Walmarts of the world where they're just sort of, you know, people. So I think we've kind of tried to embed the values into our brand.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the other things that you mentioned is that your experience in large tech companies is sort of what made you realize, hey, if all these other people who didn't have technical background could do it, then I can also do it. So maybe could you share a little bit about how you drew on your experiences and the skills you developed while working at Salesforce and Google to help you when you started your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 3 key skills I learned were sales. You know, starting a company is like, I would say the first 2 years is like 90% sales. And then the second 2 years, I feel like maybe 70% sales, but it's, for the most part, you're moving into a sales role, essentially, when you start a company. So I think having a quota, having learned how to sell, having learned how to miss, you know, what it feels like to miss your quota, what it feels like to do really well and go to club, and kind of understand like how kind of the sales mentality works, I think is super helpful, because when you start your company, you're pitching investors, you're pitching employees, you're pitching senior leaders, you're pitching partners. So you're always pitching. You're pitching people to join your app and say, this is where you're going to meet your, you know, your significant other. So I'm pitching users. So I think that having that sales experience was super helpful, and I think it allows you to kind of learn how to be confident even if you're not. So I think when I was at DoubleClick, I had to sell. Where I was Google, but I was selling DoubleClick for publishers, which, if any of you guys know, is a very complex product and has a lot of legacy. There was actually 2 products happening when I was selling it. So I was selling XFP and DFP, depending on what use case the publisher needed, and it was a lot of hand waving, but I think that helped me learn, like that was a very complex system, so you had to learn it inside and out, and then be able to answer all the questions about it, and then also be able to pitch it in a way that, you know, made the development team or whoever your buyer was sign the check to actually implement the product. So I think at Google, and you know, especially at Google, I got very deep into the kind of the technical of like understanding how the algorithms work for forecasting. So I think getting into the weeds and getting experience, like really, I remember reading a spec at Google that I was like, this is so over my head, because it was about kind of all the like math equations that go into the actual forecasting of the ads, of if they were going to run out of ad inventory. So it's a pretty, you know, it's a very complex system, but I think getting experience, getting super deep and technical, even if you're not the technical person, but being able to wrap your head around it, because I think that allowed me to have the product management skills that I could kind of go and design these really complex systems and manage people implementing them and not kind of get over my head, I guess. So I think learning how to kind of digest large pieces of information and understand it and be able to explain it back to people.
What would you say was the hardest part of the process of starting the company? Was there anything that maybe was harder than you expected before you went into it?
Yeah, oh, everything. Yeah, everything across the board. I think for me, I waited a long time. I wanted to really make sure that because you asked, like, when did you want to start a company? I was like, I was just building an app. I built an app that I wanted to use, and then I wanted to see if there was a potential to be a company, right? Did we have a business model? Were people going to spend money? I didn't know that, you know, for a while, even before we monetized, we didn't know if we just had like a nice little lifestyle, you know, dating app, which who knows what's going to happen, but we didn't know if people were going to spend money, right? So you don't know you kind of don't know the value of your asset until you monetize. So I think that was something I wish we had done a little bit earlier. I think I would have, you know, taken less dilutive funding and things like that, because we would have realized that our users are okay paying and do have the kind of income to pay. So we sort of kind of delayed our experimentation on monetization a little bit late. So I think that was something that I think would have made it easier because we would have known that, okay, we can expect this amount of money coming in, so we don't need to be running as fast or as stressed out. But we kind of all thought we were running out of money for like the second year. So we were just like, oh my gosh, let's, you know, working 100-hour weeks. So I think my other takeaway was just hiring a little bit earlier. Like I waited a very long time because I wanted, before I recruited amazing people like you guys from your amazing jobs at places like, you know, Google, I wanted to make sure that I had a real kind of compelling pitch to convince someone to join my team that, you know, we're not going to go under in a year. I'm going to be able to pay you market rate. I'm going to be able to give you. So I wanted to kind of be able to be in that position to hire really amazing people. But because of that, we're just now kind of getting there. So for 3 years, I basically was running kind of all the departments pretty poorly, I would say, you know, at a B minus level. So, you know, I was doing marketing, I'm doing design, I was doing like the ad creative. So it was like, I think that was the hardest part, is just like being kind of a one-man show for too long.
Yeah. So out of all those functions that you took on, which was your favorite? Is there anything that you enjoyed in particular?
I realized this, I love copywriting, so like my future dream job is that I get to just do like the fun copywriting for the league, and everybody else can do all the other work. But so yeah, I think you learn a lot because you kind of think of it as you're all over the. If you think of the company as like a stack, right? You're moving across the stack, and you're doing email marketing, then you're doing Facebook ads, then you're figuring out how to set up HR and Zendesk and get the support team to, you know, integrate it into Slack so that people can open a Jira ticket. So it's like you're doing every job in the company, right? So I think in some ways it's awesome because you get to really know what your strengths and weaknesses are really obviously, because you're like, whoa, I'm actually really not good at design. Like that was not a good logo, so I'm really glad we didn't go with that one. But I worked on the logo for probably like 40 hours, and then finally my friend was like, I'm just taking this off your plate because yours are not good. So I think like, but learning that, right? And so now I know that I need to, you know, have a creative director that I always run stuff by, and she has a really good eye for this. So I think you start to recognize, especially when you're young and you think you're good at everything, like I kind of learned what I wasn't good at and who I needed to hire. So I think in some ways it was helpful to kind of do everything, because then I was like, these things I'm really bad at. Like I'm not very organized, so I'm actually not a great product manager. So we just hired a PM, and he's really organized. So he's going to complement my like more sporadic style of PMing, I guess. So I think it's like kind of recognizing your holes and trying to find people to complement them.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone who's currently at a big company, who's maybe interested in starting a company or on the fence about it?
So I was you, and what I did is I did this like weeknight incubator when I was at Google, and my boss was cool. She let me leave early on like Thursdays. I think I had to get down there. It was like one night a week, and then I think the team could meet on the weekend. But it was a good kind of jumping off point, like dipping your toe in the water of entrepreneurship, because it was like a 12-week program. The idea was, at the end, we kind of do a pitch night, and you decide if anyone's ideas kind of have legs, and people vote on them. And then some of the teams stay together and work on it, some don't. But I think, given that you guys are not at a class, like you're not at graduate school, like there's a lot of project courses there, but there are some that will be in San Francisco or Mountain View that can kind of serve that same purpose. And I think that was helpful to me because that was my first foray into realizing that I was like, oh, I actually don't have that many skills to bring to the table, because we were a group of 4 and I wasn't the one building the website. And then I said I was going to be the designer. And that was when I first started realizing I wasn't as good at design as I thought I was. But I think you kind of learn that how to go through the motions of a startup and kind of what the really annoying and like hard parts are going to be and what the fun parts are going to be. And
one of the ways that you can grow is, as you mentioned, by moving into new markets, new regions. So
yes.
I read recently, I think on Forbes, that you guys are moving into Houston or have recently moved into Houston. So how did you decide that that was the right time to move into that market?
Well, I mean, you brought up a good point, is how do you grow without reducing your selectivity? One way to do that is to kind of move to different cities, right? So you keep New York as, what New York is, you keep them well, and then you go and launch Houston, and you're selective in Houston. So that's one way to grow that we are working on now. So we've launched 20 cities this summer. Mm-hmm. So that's like one growth channel, is just city launches, letting our users know we're there. Once they use the app, they share at a higher rate. So honestly, opening cities is one of our key growth strategies, and then I think the other one will be trying to understand how to grow virally within a specific community. So like within Houston, we have like a ton of people from Deloitte. I think we got the whole Houston Deloitte office or something. So it's like, how do we? But we don't have a ton of other signups in Houston, right? So how do we kind of smartly and automatedly, go and say, okay, you have a ton of Deloitte people. How do we maybe create a Deloitte promotion or some sort of, leverage that kind of core network you have to get the Accenture people. So I think we're kind of trying to now think a little bit more, how do you take grassroots strategy and kind of automate it, into your sort of launch strategy and your launch marketing. So that's what we're kind of focusing on now.
Do you have any specific changes in terms of your overall product vision, or maybe some key features that you implemented that changed the way people use the app now compared to when you first started? First
and foremost will always be kind of just improving the core product value proposition, which is we are going to deliver you someone that we think you'll be compatible with. But the stuff that I'm really excited about that isn't as revenue generating and kind of viral, but we're excited about, is we're creating a singles map, anonymous. But this has been like my dream since we just didn't have the development team to do it when we launched the league, and it was a little bit of a side feature. But basically the idea is, like, let's say your friend is recently out of a relationship and it's Friday night and it's her, you want to take her out, rebound, go out and drink and meet some nice single people. So you're like, where do you go? In San Francisco, that's a very hard question. You're like, there's nowhere to go, right? Where are the single people? So basically, what we want to do is allow people to kind of refresh the map and then see where, if all the single people are at, what is the one in Mountain View, the big bar you guys always go to? The Google bar? Sports, yeah. So if everyone's at sports page, was it? Yeah. Then you could see that on the map and be like, maybe their sports page is a good Friday night spot. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We're kind of MVPing it right now. But I think the idea is like, I want to increase the efficiency of just like the whole problem, which is, single people don't know other people are single, right? So that's sort of why I love the slap bracelets that we always do, because it's like when you wear a glow-in-the-dark slap bracelet, you are single. So you're not going to have any of the kind of accidental, you're hitting on someone who has a boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that. So I personally want to add more clarity and transparency and efficiency to the process. And I think our users are smart enough to kind of figure a lot of stuff out. It's just like we're trying to remove the kind of the noise and the clutter and help them kind of get to the end goal faster, which is meeting someone offline that you fancy, I guess.
Yeah, the map feature sort of reminds me of the new Snapchat
I know.
map. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not a Snapchat user because I'm too old. I decided, I was like, Instagram, I'm stopping at Instagram. But I just looked at the Snapchat feature, and it's very similar. We want to keep ours anonymous, of course, so you're not that's really creepy to be like, that match didn't like me back, but he's over here. You don't want people to like go to have too much information, but I think just getting a high level understanding of like where your kind of nightlife is going on in your city, and then I think to me this helps us move into more of a social networking like vibe and aspect, and then if you can have people who aren't single just using the app as like kind of a nightlife radar app, then I think it becomes a lot more interesting, and we can start to think about, can we actually become a social network, or are we always going to be a dating service?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think in San Francisco's case, there are single people out there, but a really hard part of the process is that everyone's so busy that it's really hard for people to align schedules to meet up. So I think that anything you can do to make the process of actually meeting up more seamless, I think
that's why we invested a lot in events. So we have actually another feature that we're coming out with is like a fully aggregated events feed. So right now we just kind of handpick cool events in our cities that we think are on brand and cool, but instead I think as we think about kind of moving into more of a utility and trying to be a social network that people actually depend on and use on a weekly basis, then we want to start getting into understanding kind of where the user is, why they're opening the app at that time, right? And what their use case is at that moment. So we don't want to get into like the Tinder, like I'm looking for tonight, where do I go tonight thing, but I think of it as more of a like events, like if I can meet 3 of my matches by going to the Tipsy Pig on Friday night and I don't have to have a 1.5 like awkward Starbucks like interview meeting with 3 people, during my workday, like to me that's way more efficient. I got to kind of meet them in a more fun environment. Maybe I hit it off with some of them, maybe I didn't. I got to talk to them for 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe I like all 3 of them. But I think to me, like kind of moving group, like what Grouper used to do, which was a competitor that died, but they set up 3 people and 3 guys and 3 girls. People actually really liked that. Like I remember when I was doing user research, like people liked the concept. There wasn't a lot of retention. So I had a retention problem. No one did like a second grouper, but there is something there, I think, with like taking away the kind of not requiring everyone to go to these one-on-one kind of interview style dates. And if we can kind of change the format of dating and make it more group and fun and oriented around values or hobbies or yoga or people with dogs or whatever it might be, I think that's like a much more efficient way to date and to meet new people.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is one feature that the league offers that a lot of people don't know about that maybe you wish they knew?
Well, I guess I would say a lot of people know about this, but Googlers hate this feature. So because it basically blocks you from all your Googlers. We use LinkedIn.
And there's so many.
I know. Well, basically it's like Google and Facebook hate us, but then everyone else is like, thank you for not matching me with my coworker in the cube next to me. But yeah, I would say that feature is probably pretty hidden. Is just that when you do, because we ask you to log in with your LinkedIn, which people think is kind of weird, it actually allows us to then block you from anyone who works with you or anyone you're connected to. So I was in sales, so I was always friending people on LinkedIn, and I did a lot of like business development on LinkedIn. So like the last thing I wanted to do was see like one of the people I was, kind of doing business deals with on my feed. Like that's weird. So I was like, let's just prevent that situation. So I talked about that a little bit, but that one is hard that one not everyone knows about. And then I would say you can also sort. So I come from the CRM industry, right? So when I look at the match screen of the league, everyone's like, it's very, there's so much data there. And I'm like, well, if you're like, as a CRM person, like you want to see all of the information kind of condensed in like an executive summary. So if you look at our match screen, I'm like the only one on the team that likes that screen, but I like it because it shows you all the information you need, and you can actually sort your matches by least flaky, most popular, most recent, and then your best match. And a lot of people don't know that, but we use the best match algorithm is actually pretty good, and no one uses that either. So those are the under-marketed, I would call them under-marketed features in the app because we haven't done much to kind of tell the users about them.
In terms of the elite sort of brand that the league has, do you think that could potentially also lead to maybe like inadequate matches? Because I think that a lot of times people might find that they're really compatible with someone who doesn't necessarily come from the same like high-level social class background that they do. There's cross-social class relationships.
Well, statistically, that's not true. I mean, if you just look, like if we're designing, like I always like to say, everything's a proxy and your V1 is never going to be perfect, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to just ignore some of the outlying use cases. It's like product management, right? So that's sort of the way I think about it, is that I looked at like statistically who is getting married to each other, right? Similar age, similar education level, mm-hmm. and actually similar industry is highly significant. So, I mean, I guess you can either try to like go with the data or go against the data, right? But I think for us, if it's already happening in the real world, like we're just trying to create a software platform that facilitates that. We're not trying to sort of, I mean, eventually, yeah, maybe I do want to change what people are doing in the real world. I think that's when you start to have influence. When you're a company like Google, you can actually start to really make a change in society and how people are using software. But I think at our stage, we just want to be able to get to that point and give our users what they need, what they're kind of coming to our door for. So I don't know, I guess I look at it as we're kind of using math and data to give you kind of the best probability of someone you would match with, and we're not kind of trying to change the data set that we're using. We're trying to use the data set that people have researched for 20 or 30 years and apply it in like a smarter way. So eventually I want to have my own research team and kind of maybe, debunk some of this stuff or, come up with, find out how to, I think we always talk about that. We want to, the creatives that never meet the finance people, how do we make sure that they're both kind of coming into the community on equal amounts? And it's a challenge. Like we have way more finance people coming into the New York community than creatives or people on Broadway. I think that's just a fact of like New York population, but B, like a little bit of a fact of life. And it is going to be harder for that match to happen in the real world too. So shouldn't it be kind of harder for it to happen on a dating app? So I don't know. I guess we try to think that we're kind of mimicking the real world, but making it more efficient and useful. And not trying to kind of tell people what they should or shouldn't be doing at this point. But we do kick people out if they're bad. So we do tell people we do make sure people are respectful. So that's one thing we're pretty hard and fast on. But as far as like whether they're swiping or being super picky, we give them advice. But if people want to be picky and say no to every single person we give them for a whole year and then complain. And you can't please everybody. As you guys know, product managers, it's like you always have that email that keeps you up at night. And from like, we just had one from it was actually a 72-year-old lesbian woman who was very mad at me because we didn't have anyone to give her. And, we refunded her, but I stayed, I did research and I was like, what if we did an advertising campaign to get, and then I was like, this is not, at the end of the day, especially when you're running a company, you gotta cut that 20% off. I cannot be worrying about the 72-year-old lesbian right now when we have 30-year-olds maybe running out of matches. That's way higher, more critical of a problem. So it's all kind of triage. And I think a lot of the questions that go into like things we want to do when we have more people on staff are, yes, like educating people on why you should be open-minded and why you shouldn't reject people when they're 5'9" instead of 5'10". And I have a lot of like blog posts saved up in me that I want to help people kind of to optimize their dating life. But first we got to kind of get the product out.
In terms of growth, another one of the opportunities could be expanding more into the LGBT community. So have you thought about ways to do that?
We do. We have a very good, we have a great LGBT community in New York and actually a really good one in London. Like it's like weirdly disproportionate. But we haven't done any targeted marketing. That's been all word of mouth through that. Because actually on Facebook you can only target straight people, or like they make you have a separate campaign for each one. So that's been a pretty viral community for us. So we want to, I think as we think about like where to spend in marketing, it's definitely investing in LGBT, I think, because they also spend a lot too. So it's like I would say our LGBT and the New York finance, they both are kind of one of our better customers. So we definitely want to learn how to kind of market to them and acquire them more scalably.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back a little bit to the filtering by education level and job, because something that I was thinking about was that you're using this as a proxy for determining whether someone is driven, right, in some ways. But there's cases where people could be driven or really passionate about something, but don't necessarily have the education level.
Right, it doesn't come out like on paper as
So like
much,
potentially like you could be an artist and you're really passionate about that and are a great artist, but in terms of education and job, that might not be shown in your resume, or you might not have a LinkedIn page. So have you thought about other things that you can use as proxies to get at that sentiment?
Yeah, we talked a lot about that because LinkedIn is going to become, right now LinkedIn is fine and it's sort of serving as a natural curation mechanism for us, because if you don't have a LinkedIn account, like, you drop off at that point, right? So we almost don't even have to deal with the people that don't have LinkedIn accounts, but a lot of those are creatives. And so when we launched LA, we had a big problem because a lot of people in LA don't use LinkedIn. It's like kind of not cool. If like you're a cool person in the industry, you're not on LinkedIn really. So we ended up building a new flow so you could pay to skip it. And then at LA, when we launched, we ended up kind of comping a lot of people to get through that kind of original LinkedIn screen. And I think as we think about international, that's going to be a huge issue for us too, because not everyone internationally is kind of as LinkedIn focused. It's very white collar, right? So as you get into kind of the creative, the producers, they're not on. They might be on IMDb. They're on. So we talked about Amex, like has an API login. So we're kind of brainstorming with some different ways to kind of start to get outside of our kind of core LinkedIn, like white collar demographic. But I would say that LinkedIn does have a pretty big audience. So I think for, short term, we want to at least just get at least the LinkedIn users in those cities that were live. And then like step 2 is let's get people that don't have LinkedIn accounts and figure out how to get them in.
I think there's a lot of professional networks that are sort of more targeted. I think there's also
there's
one
Doximity
for doctors,
So we've talked to them. That's probably one we'll do next year, Doximity.
If you can talk about how you think about user retention, because it seems like if people are really successful, then they may just churn off the platform very quickly.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, if they really hate the experience, they'll turn off quickly. But there's like this sweet spot of people who are maybe like a little bit frustrated somehow, but like enjoy the platform and will like stay on it for a long time and spend money. So like, when people churn, how do you
think? It's like good churn and bad churn, yeah. So we call it good churn and bad churn. We keep our names pretty simple here, but. We are excited about good churn. I think that worrying about good churn is like worrying about someone stealing your idea when you're an entrepreneur. It's kind of like that means your product is doing the job that it was designed to do, and hopefully you can kind of be smart enough to build a business model around that to support that job that it's doing. So we don't worry about good churn, and I like to think that every good churn is like 5 new users in my head. I think of that because if they tell their friends or they say it at the marriage ceremony or by just how viral dating is in general, people tend to say where they met. So I'm super. If everybody did good churn right away, we'd be like, that would be an amazing problem to have. Bad churn is not good. And bad churn typically happens when people don't get matches. So they usually, and that is related to either pickiness, so they're saying no to everyone, they're like really just not happy with the selection, or they're very low performing and everyone says no to them, right? So that's sort of the like 2 use cases. Or they're kind of, then there's a bunch of people in the middle that kind of sort of picky, not really, but also not really happy, not getting a ton of matches. So you have kind of so yeah, there's a lot of different kind of experiences people can have on the app, and I think that's one of the hardest parts of the product management for it is that you kind of have, we're just now doing kind of cohorts and segments, but like the older people do churn faster, right? So it's like it's almost like you have so many different customer segments to model that it gets a little bit confusing. So what we've started to do is now just focus on our target, our sweet spot. Like all our revenue, our user growth, our referrals are all like 25 to 36 is sort of our sweet spot. So really focusing on in that cohort, are we getting bad churn? And we don't want bad churn in that cohort, but if in the other cohorts, we're kind of okay because they're a little bit outside of our sweet spot. So it's just being like super focused on, and if the people churned out, why they did, and you can kind of see, the cool thing about just having all the data is you can literally see someone's exact experience, who they saw, if they liked them. Maybe they saw a terrible profile and like disabled their account. You can actually go and see that. So you can kind of track back what caused users to churn, and usually it is like a lack of, for us, it's a lack of matches, which means that's why we're so focused on improving the algorithm, because that's going to increase retention a ton. If you get 1 good match a week, you're going to stay on, even if it's only 1. But if we're not giving you 1 for 3 weeks, you're going to churn. So for us, that's optimizing the algorithm better to make sure you're not getting, you're getting good matches, and you're not getting them all at once at the beginning and burn through them. So that's sort of the other game theory part, is that I think gets into ethics a little bit, is like, do you give everyone their best matches right at the beginning, or do you sprinkle in different offerings so that you always are liking the guy we think you should like? When you only have 100 or a couple thousand people signed up in a city, who do you let in? Right now, we've started moving into an entirely like predictive model-based selection, where rather than us being like, oh, you'd be good for the brand, you went to a great school, you have a great profile, like let's put you in. Instead, we actually look and see, do their preferences overlap with other people, and are they going to have a good time inside? Because if the girl only likes 60-year-old men, and we don't have any 60-year-old men, she's not going to have a good time at the party, is what we say. So it's interesting because you can start to kind of almost launch with people that you are predicting are going to find a match. So now we're almost predicting matches like weeks in advance of when we launch the cities, and we're only launching with people we think are going to get a match. So yeah, it's a totally different strategy than kind of before when it was very guesswork and like, oh, these are people that we think we're going to match, but it's very human. And now it's completely data-driven based on, you know, their pickiness. Well, if it's a brand new user, it's based on just users that resemble them and what they've seen in the past, and we can kind of predict what the behavior is going to be once we launch the city.
I have a question about how you choose what's a good education selectivity, if it's level or school. Because I feel like, I know in 2013, actually, Laszlo came out and said that GPA was totally agnostic to Googler's success. So so it actually wasn't indicative of anything. The only thing he said that was in the New York Times was conversation and interviewing. And so given that a lot of schools, you know, you can make arguments that some schools are better than others, but also there's a lot of industry-specific knowledge that comes from particular schools.
So we value profession like just as high as education.
So is the education like what school you go to, or what level of education?
Program-based.
So who, like, what metric do you?
Like a medical school. So if you went to any medical school in the United States, that's considered highly selective in our our tiering system.
So like for the particular undergrad, you're like, oh, this is an Ivy League school versus this is.
So we have 3 categories. We call a school highly selective, selective, or it's just not tagged.
I see. So you mark every school. That's right.
And programs. So like, for instance, if you're, like you said, a doctor, if you're in a doctor's program at University of Alabama, that is highly selective. You're studying to be a doctor, right? So it's program-based.
Yeah, okay, so that was my question, was like what type of algorithmic, like how do you approach that algorithmically, or using?
Well, we haven't done anything super cool yet, but right now it's sort of in like V2 stage where we're kind of, we've sort of have the data set tagged, but it's not very international right now, so we're kind of adding in more international programs, and now that we're in London and Toronto, so we learned a lot of like, oh, we didn't have this school in our database. So now we're kind of crowdsourcing a bunch of the schools and the programs, and everyone writes them a little bit different on LinkedIn, so it's not perfect, but if we see, like we can look for the word, you know, MD or something to show that they are kind of investing in higher education, and that's sort of the way we're trying to kind of proxy it. And I like to think of the education as it's less of a, I think people use it as a proxy for like, I wouldn't say ambition, I guess it would say, the way the people I've seen use it, like I've actually watched different people use the filters, and it is definitely for people with graduate degrees. Like the only people that care about it are the ones with graduate degrees, and I think it is because they tend to want to find someone that shares their values and that is in their kind of industry, right? So we've noticed that we did an analysis on who actually uses the education filter, and it's usually people in their 30s and with a graduate degree, doctor, lawyer, something like that. So, but yeah, it's interesting to see how, like, who uses these and who doesn't, and it's pretty interesting. We should write a book sometime. But the good news is, though, if anyone's read Dataclysm, which was kind of the last big book written about online dating, we want to kind of do an update to that. But the good news is a lot of the kind of like terrible trends he talks about, which, you know, is still true across the board in dating, but they are getting better. Like people are getting more open-minded. People are getting less racist on online dating. People are getting, you know, less heightist, less elitist. Like we've noticed it in our data even in the past 3 years. Like people are becoming more open-minded on online dating, and it's a shift that takes time. So I think as much as we can like be mad about it and hate the space, I think it is improving these products. Using more authentication, getting more information about the user, I think it is helping us as a society kind of make better matches for ourselves. So I would disagree with the point that like it's causing people to be, you know, more elitist. I actually think it's because you're able to see all these people that you weren't able to see before in your homogeneous, you know, Google life or whatever you were at. In my life was, you know, I took one bus back and forth. So it's like I didn't get out of my comfort zone. So I like to think that, I mean, and a study just came out actually that online dating is actually widening people's like, you know, preferences, and also there's a lot more interracial marriages happening just because of the surge of online dating, which they're attributing it 100% to online dating. So that just came out in, I'll send you guys to follow up, but that just came out in, I think, the New York Times or something about how online dating is resulting in kind of a more open-minded society.
Mm-hmm. I'll do a question from the Dory, from someone who's watching in the live stream. You keep using the term singles, but open relationships and polyamory are becoming more and more prevalent nowadays. Does the league explicitly try to avoid such users? It doesn't seem to discriminate against singles in open relationships, but does have a bias against openly married. What's your take?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when we launched, we wanted to be really clear about what the product was and what the brand was, what the offering was. So it was for people looking for long or serious relationships, soulmates, life partners. It wasn't for casual sex, and it wasn't for a person in an open relationship trying to find another person to add to their people. So, I mean, it was a very kind of like core focused use case. Like I said, I was designing it for myself. To me, that wasn't going to help me solve my problem more. So I designed it to be, to speak very clearly about why you should be there. I think we've kicked out a couple people that were married and using it for open relationships, and I think the way I think about it is there's a ton of dating apps out there, and it's getting more and more like niche and fragmented and use case specific. So, I mean, I think that I can even name some that are like designed for three-ways or designed for polyamory. So I think that instead of trying to be everything to everyone, why don't we just get really good at the demographic we have and assume that someone else will kind of take that opportunity. I guess one thing I've learned the last 3 years is like you can't go after every opportunity and you're gonna burn out, and I have. So it's like you have to make hard decisions, and I think for us it's like I can't worry about the over 40-year-olds, and I can't worry about the you can't worry about the polyamorous and the open relationship people because they're not contributing meaningfully to like actually our core business that we're building, our core company that we're building, right? So it's like you have to support the users that are funding you, and then let's build them a product, and then if we can kind of get that right, like then there's a lot more products and people to build for. So I kind of think of that as like when we have an R&D department, sure.
I have a question about
sure.
How do you get started? Like I heard you say you got 4 people. And how did you get the 3 other people on board with you?
Yeah.
And looks like the LinkedIn is kind of critical to this app. And how did you get partnership with them? And were you like worried if they like, is it open API or something like, if they're going to withdraw that at some point?
Yeah, it's a good question. The LinkedIn thing is interesting now that they're bought by Microsoft especially, but we were like the first one to use them, and they were like, wait, a dating site wants to use us? I was like, you guys have the best data set in the world. Of course I want to use it. So we kind of got grandfathered in because people are actually creating LinkedIn accounts to join our app, which is like really high friction first when you're paying for a user. You're like, what? So we're giving them like users in a sense because people are like, oh, I need a LinkedIn account. I don't want to pay, so I'll go create a LinkedIn account and then authenticate. So I think they saw that there's clear like benefit in new users. So it's sort of, we kind of positioned it that way as like we'll be giving you new leads, and we're not going to do anything spammy or anything weird. We're just literally using displaying the data. But they actually have cut off their API access now, the public profile view. So we actually are grandfathered into like a pretty nice little moat, I guess we have some extra API permissions. Your other question was about.
Oh yeah, the 3 other people.
Oh, starting.
Yeah.
So the starting was funny. This is why now we're doing these small cities. I'm having like flashbacks to when I was in San Francisco and literally going door to door and knocking and being like, do you know any single people? Can you text them right now? And I need like 200 more people so we can launch. So what I did is I set myself a goal of like 300 guys and 300 girls, and we actually built it into the waitlist screen, like a little progress bar of like how many more women and men were needed to get to like the 300, and so, which it was kind of an overkill, I guess, of a feature because it was only pertinent for from 0 to 300, and then it was sort of outdated at that point. But it took a long time to get to 0 to 300 in each gender category. So, but yeah, that was sort of the goal, was once we got to 300, we were going to launch and see if it worked. And that's obviously a very small number of users. So that was also why there's only 3 to 5 potentials given every day. Because I was like, well, how do we launch this if we, because it was in the era of like unlimited swipes, and Tinder was giving everybody as many as you wanted. So we actually kind of pulled a page out of Coffee Meets Bagel and Hinge's book, because they were doing the kind of daily batch thing, and I was like, well, let's do that and make it more fun, like happy hour. And then, and so that's why we give only 3 to 5 a day, so that we don't have to be concerned about supply issues, especially upon launch, right? Because some of the people we're launching, we only have like 100 people ready to show them, and then we are kind of betting that we'll be acquiring more people and they'll be coming in, and so you have to kind of figure out how much of a archive, or I guess backlog, you have to kind of create first before you launch, so you know how many you need. So we found that it's about 300 guys and 300 girls is sort of the minimum you need, because you have to assume that like 70 70% might log in, right? And then of the ones that log in, they might not, some might be picky. So you kind of want to make sure that you have enough people that actually had a good experience at the end of that kind of first launch experience.
Okay, so the first question kind of piggybacks off what you just mentioned, and the other one is completely different. So how did you guys originally get to that number 300 for each?
It's kind of random, I guess. Yeah, I think a couple different ways. We kind of triangulated it. So one was, that was just the number I picked for launching San Francisco. So that was me being very, I guess, cursory. And then the second piece was we did this model that predicts how many happy people are going to be in a cohort on a wait list. So we can see in Indianapolis, there's 438 people of the 2,000 that we predict will have a good time in the party. So that's sort of it's a little bit of how many people do you need to make sure there's going to be a good amount of happy users. So that's sort of where that 300 comes from. Because if we found that if there's at least 400 is about the right happy users, so then you assume not all of them log in and stuff, so you get to kind of about 300.
Okay, cool. And question 2 is, you mentioned that you did a incubator through the nights, weekends after you were working here?
Yeah, it was like Google. I was at the SF office though, so it was easier to commute to it. But it was it was Women 2.0 put it on, but it was for men and women. It was just called, now I can't remember. It was just called innovation program or something. But yeah, it was cool just because it got you in the motion, but you weren't, it wasn't your day job. Everyone had a day job, so it was a little bit less intense, and you got to kind of, try your hand at it without having a ton of pressure.
Okay, because that was the other question, is how did you manage doing that and working here at the same time?
Oh yeah, well, I didn't really, no, I worked hard at Google, so I just worked a lot. That was why, one of the reasons why I had relationship issues, because I was working so hard. So, so it all comes back, right? It all comes back full circle. But yeah, I think I just tried to balance it. I did a lot of that on the weekends. That would be almost my whole weekend would be on that, and then at nights I would work till 7, and then work on it from 7 to 9 in a conference room here, and just hammer it out. So that's how I did the GMAT. Studied for the GMAT here too. But yeah.
Maybe we have time for one more question.
Lucky purple back there.
On business school, 2 things you learned in business school that was useful for starting a startup. After 2 years at Google, did you feel like you needed to go to business school to leave and start a startup?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think if you know you want to start a startup and you get into a top 3 business school, you should go, because it's going to help the process of starting up. It's just going to, it's worth the money, I guess. If you think about it just as a pure ROI-based argument, the amount of amazing people you can get mentored by, the amount of access to funding environment, you're paying for opportunity, right? You're paying for opportunity to kind of be presented to you. So I think if that's it, but I think once you get out of the top 1 or 2 or 3 programs, then I think it becomes a lot about what are you going to learn that is going to change the trajectory of your career, right? Because I think, and you don't know if you want to be, I guess, a lot of our funding came from connections I made at Stanford. So that's why I can't with a straight face say you didn't need to go. I didn't need to go, but did I use anything I learned from business school? I feel like I knew what I didn't know. I knew enough about because we've studied entrepreneurship for 2 years. So you've heard enough horror stories and terrible stories. You kind of know that you need to hire someone, or you should be doing this as a model, or you should be doing more data analysis there. So you kind of know your blind spots a little bit. So I think you can kind of, you run your company better because you have that knowledge. But I don't think it's a huge, I don't think it's a huge, besides the access to funding and obviously the network that helped us launch the league specifically, because there's a lot of Stanford people on it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say if you want to start a company and you get into a place like Stanford, they are born and bred to put entrepreneurs out into the world. So they're very good at that. And I felt very confident coming out and starting a company. And I think that's hard to value, that confidence and the ability to, especially as a single founder. No pun, double entendre, I know. But especially as a single founder, I think having that degree, even though it's a little I don't credential, I think I don't care that much about pedigree, but I do think it helps you just kind of walk into a room and be yes, I'm fundraising, yes, I'm doing this, and having people take you seriously. So I do think there's something there that you have to give credit for. But yeah, I'm not Super Bowl. I mean, it's expensive. It's an expensive project, business school. So right. I had a lot of sleepless nights about it. before I went.
And with that, it's time's up. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Amanda for being here with us.
Yeah, it was so fun. Great questions, guys.